So tonight I have two stories to tell you, and they're great stories, but when I was thinking about how I would go about teasing the stories like I do at the top of these episodes, I couldn't quite think of sort of what the connective tissue was between them. But then I realized really what makes these stories exceptional is that they're both just excellent stories, as I'm getting hit by the heat of this fire, to be told around a campfire. But before we get into those two stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right campfire, because that's all we do, and we upload 2, 3, even 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, go ahead and invite the like button to come to your campfire and cook some s'mores with you. But give them the wrong date and location. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into tonight's stories. In the late 1990s, in rural New York, there were these two teenage girls named Rachel and Molly, and they were both very good friends. They were part of a bigger group of friends in their high school that sort of spent a lot of time together, but Rachel and Molly oftentimes were together by themselves quite a bit. And the thing that sort of drew the two together and really sort of made them friends in the first place and also drew them to that bigger group was their shared love of goth culture. So being goth, especially in the late 90s and early 2000s, if you were like a high school kid, basically meant you wore all black clothes, you had like black nail polish, black lipstick, your hair's black, you sort of embraced all things dark and macabre. Some people were genuinely very into sort of like the idea of embracing the dark side of things. Other people just did it as like a fashion statement. But in the late 1990s and early 2000s, it was definitely a thing, certainly in America. And Rachel and Molly were both very committed goths, and they just sort of loved that whole vibe. And one of the things that Rachel and Molly really liked to do as goth teenagers is they and their group of friends would go hang out in the local cemetery. Now, at first, the reason they did this was actually to sort of be ironic. It's like they were known as the goth kids in their high school, and so the idea of them hanging out in a cemetery just seemed kind of too on the nose. And so they went out there almost like a joke, the whole group of them. But they found this cemetery was kind of a cool hangout spot, and they began to really enjoy hanging out in the cemetery, and it became sort of like their go-to thing, especially on the weekends. Now, typically when Rachel, Molly, and their friends would go hang out in the cemetery, they would do so at night to sort of maximize, the darkness, really leaning into the whole goth side of things. But also, they would always go as a group, like it was Rachel, Molly, and several other people that would be in the cemetery hanging out at one time. Like Rachel and Molly did not go there just the two of them, it was always a group. And part of the reason was it was just more enjoyable that way, but also, despite their love of spending time in the cemetery, it was still a cemetery at night, and it was, a little bit creepy. And so there was, strength in numbers, and so they liked being there with a group. It felt safer. One Friday night, Rachel was home alone when she got a call from Molly. And Molly asked her, hey, do you want to go hang out in the cemetery? And Rachel's like, duh, like, that's what we do on the weekends. I'd love to go. Like, come pick me up. Let's go. And so Rachel, she gets all ready, and, she's waiting outside. And eventually, Molly shows up in her car. And the first thing Rachel notices is that Molly's all alone in the car. She is not with the group that normally she would be with when they picked Rachel up. So Rachel, she walks out to the car and she climbs in and she says to Molly, like, hey, so are we now going to pick up the rest of our friends? Like, where is everybody? And Molly's like, actually, no, I tried getting in touch with everybody else, but everybody's either busy or working or hungover from last night. So it's just going to be us two at the cemetery. Like, is that okay? And Rachel admittedly did not think this was okay. Because again, like, this was not an activity that these girls did by themselves. Rachel was very close with Molly and vice versa. Like, that was fine. It's a little uncomfortable being in the cemetery without the big group. But Rachel didn't want to be rude. She sort of felt like Molly had already clearly made peace with them being alone out there. And so Rachel's like, oh yeah, that's fine. Like, it'll be great, just the two of us. Like, let's go. And so even though she sort of didn't want to, she gets in the car and they take off and they drive, the half mile to the cemetery. Now, this cemetery was enormous. It was like this massive, very old cemetery. And when you pull up to it, as they did in their car, you would first see this huge, like medieval gate, like this archway that sort of goes across the entrance to the cemetery. And like the big wrought iron gates, they're sort of permanently open, but it's this very like sort of Gothic looking, archway that you drive through. And then once you're in the cemetery, the road you're on basically cuts down the very middle of the cemetery all the way to the backside. It's a huge, probably like over a mile from one side to the other. And it sort of split the cemetery into two big parts, the right and the left side as you go in. And where they, Molly, Rachel, and their friends loved to hang out was sort of, as you're driving into the cemetery, like the back left corner. And the reason they liked that area is because on the left side of the cemetery, sort of on the left-hand side, there were sort of like rolling hills that all the plots were in. And in particular, in the back left corner of the cemetery, there was like this one depression in the earth where there really weren't that many tombstones. And there was like a big boulder sitting at the bottom of the depression and a tree that was next to it. And so basically, if you were scanning across the top of the cemetery, just from the gate, looking out at the entire expanse of land, anybody that was down in that sort of depressed area in the back left corner, you basically couldn't see them. They're sort of tucked away down there with the rock and the tree. And so for, teenagers, for Rachel, Molly, and their friends, that was like a great place to hang out and kind of be away from the prying eyes of the public. And so, Rachel and Molly, they drive through this gate and they make the familiar drive right down the middle of this road all the way to the very back of the cemetery. By this point, it is getting dark outside. It's not totally dark yet, but it's pretty dark. Nobody's out at the cemetery. No one really ever was. Occasionally on the other side of the cemetery, basically on the exact opposite side from where they would hang out, sometimes the college kids that were in town, there was a university in their town, they would sometimes hop the fence on the other side, and there was like a little bonfire section, like right up against the fence in the cemetery. Totally not allowed, but they would sneak over and do that sometimes. But that was sort of rare. But other than those occasional college students over there, the cemetery was basically always vacant. And so they get to the other side, they park their car, they get out, and they walk right from the road, basically right down this it's a gentle sloping hill, but down into this depression, their hangout spot. And once they get down there, there's that big rock and the tree, and they each took up positions sitting on the rock, leaning against the tree, and then just began crushing cigarettes and just hanging out, because that's what goth teenagers in rural New York in the 1990s did. So Rachel and Molly, they're doing their thing. They're having a nice time. They're swapping stories. They're talking about their boyfriends, about drama at school. And eventually, it gets fully dark outside, and the girls are still just having a nice time. And Rachel's actually thinking to herself, like, actually, this is kind of nice. Like, this isn't scary. This is kind of cool. Like, I'm having good one-on-one time with my buddy here. But eventually, as they're down there, they start to smell smoke. Now, remember, periodically, on the other side of the cemetery, like pretty far away, was that bonfire area that college kids sometimes would, start bonfires over there. And, when Rachel and Molly had first come into the cemetery, they had looked over there and hadn't seen a fire. But they're thinking, we've been hanging out here for quite a while. It's entirely possible that in the time we've been down here, that those kids have hopped the fence, started a fire, and that's what we're smelling. Now, the fire itself really had no bearing directly on whatever Molly and Rachel were going to do that night. I mean, they're on opposite sides of the cemetery. But Rachel and Molly knew that historically, whenever there was a bonfire over there, eventually the police would always show up, because you're not allowed to do that. And they would kick off, the kids, they'd make them put their fire out. And then always the police would do, a check of the entire cemetery. And anybody that was hanging out in there, like Molly and Rachel were, also got kicked out, even if they were not starting fires. And so Molly and Rachel, they look at each other after smelling this fire, and they both sort of have the same thought, like, we should probably just leave, before the police get here and make us leave. And, after all, they'd been there for quite a while. They were about ready to leave anyhow, so this was like no big deal. So, they put out their last cigarette, they got their stuff, and they turned and began walking back up the hill, back in the direction they had come down on, back in the direction of their car. And as they're walking up, they're expecting to crest the hill and, see their car and see the whole cemetery and, maybe way off in the distance, maybe they'll see a flicker of the bonfire that they must be smelling. But as they walk up and they see their car and they look out across the cemetery, they don't see a fire over there. Instead, basically right over to their right, like, 100 meters away from them, was another sort of depression in the cemetery, another rolling hill that sort of went down out of sight. And they could see basically the tops of a flickering fire, like in the neighboring depression, like 100 meters away. Now, when they showed up, they were definitely alone on this side of the cemetery. There was nobody else here. And so clearly someone has shown up and started a fire while they were here. And they've never seen any behavior like this. This is like completely unusual. Like, no one starts fires over here. Like, what is that? So the two girls they're curious. Like, did the college kids come over here to start a fire? Because again, they can only see the tops of the flames of this fire down in this neighboring depression. They can't see the person or people who are around it. But they're thinking like, the people over there have no idea that we are over here. And so the two girls are like, well, what if we kind of go back down to where we were and sneak up the far side of our sort of hilled in area and poke our heads over and like see whose fire this is. We'll see the college kids and see what they're doing. We can like spy on them or something. And the two girls are like, yeah, why not? We're already here. And so the two girls, they turn around, they walk back down into the base of their depression where the big rock and the tree was that they were just sitting on for the past couple of hours. And they walk past it basically to the other side and begin walking up that hill. And as they're getting closer and closer to the top of this hill, when eventually, once they reach the top, they could peer over and see the fire and see whoever was there. Right as they got almost to the top, Rachel sort of unintentionally makes some noise, like the way she was walking, and she sort of made a sound as she stepped on something, but she accidentally makes a fair amount of noise. And the only noise in the area was the sound of the fire. Like, they hadn't heard any voices yet. And so Rachel, she just covers her mouth and looks over at Molly, and Molly kind of looked at her like, what are you doing? Like, we're sneaking up on these people. Like, why are you making noise? And the two girls, they just freeze for a second, waiting to see if, whoever was over there heard them and sort of reacted to the noise Rachel made. But it was silent, sort of eerily silent. And at this point, Rachel and Molly, it was like the mood just shifted. Like, they had not reached the top of the hill yet. They had not seen whoever was at this fire. But it was like something just felt wrong now. And the two girls looked at each other and they're like, maybe we should just turn around and leave. And they both were like, yeah, let's get out of here. Like, this doesn't feel right. And so right then and there, the two girls, as quietly as they could, turned and retreated back down to the center of the depression where the rock and the tree was, and they begin walking back up the original side of the hill in the direction of where their car is parked at the top. And as they're walking up, Rachel just happens to turn back around where they had just been, just to look in the direction of where they had just been. And now she sees there is clearly a man standing on the ridgeline with the fire behind him illuminating him, and he's just standing there sort of ominously staring in the direction of Rachel and Molly. And he's just not saying a word, he's just looking in their direction. Clearly he was the one over at the fire, he must have heard them. And Rachel, she whips around and she's like, Molly, look. And Molly looks and she's like, let's get out of here. We don't know who that guy is, like, we gotta get out of here. And so Rachel and Molly, they begin quickly walking up the hill. And then a second later, Rachel turns back around and the man is no longer on the hill, but then she sees movement and she realizes he's running down the hill in their direction. And so the girls start screaming, they start running up the hill. Rachel's constantly looking around and this guy's gaining on them. They get to the top of the hill, they charge over to Molly's car, they jump inside, they lock the doors, they fire it up and they drive off. And as they're driving, Rachel's looking out the back window and she sees this man basically looking. He's reached the road, like he almost got to them. And he was looking in their direction. And as they drove off, he just slowly turned and walked back down the hill out of sight. And so Rachel and Molly, they're like totally shaken up by this. Like, clearly that wasn't a college kid. Like that was a 40-something-year-old man who they had never seen before. Like the whole situation just felt totally just creepy and spooky, and they really didn't know what to make of it. They sort of felt like what could have happened if he reached us? Like what was he trying to do? Like what just happened? But ultimately, when they got home, or when Molly dropped Rachel off at her house, the two girls were sort of like, man, that was crazy, huh? They kind of like chalked it up as like just a crazy night, like, oh boy, we better, stay out of there alone at night, like it was just sort of a joke by the time they were done for the night. And so Rachel, she goes into her house, doesn't even tell her mom. She just, puts her stuff down, goes to her room, and Molly, she went to her house, and she too didn't even tell anyone. She went to bed as well. The next morning, Rachel woke up and she went downstairs into the kitchen, and her mom was in there. And her mom was just kind of doing her morning routine. And when she saw Rachel come in, she said to Rachel, like, hey, how was your night last night? And Rachel was like, oh, it was fine. Me and Molly went out. It was fine. No big deal. And her mom was like, oh, did you hear what happened last night? And Rachel's like, no, what do you mean? What happened? And her mom was like, well, a woman in our town got kidnapped. And she got kidnapped from the very parking garage where I park. Like she worked in the same building as me. She got kidnapped. And Rachel's like, oh my God, like what happened to her? Like, did they find her? And Rachel's mom is like, no, unfortunately it was too late. When they found her, she was dead. And in fact, whoever kidnapped and then killed her brought her body last night to the local cemetery and burned her in this huge bonfire. And whoever did it still hasn't been caught. And when Rachel heard this, it was like her whole world came crashing down, because suddenly she understood what had happened the night before. That fire was no ordinary fire. That was the killer that chased them down the hill. That fire very likely contained the woman who had been killed. They were right next to this person, this killer, and this horrible thing happening. And even more creepy is like, they were there very likely when the killer arrived, set up shop, and began burning this body, no more than 100 meters away from them. And what would have happened if that man who chased them, what would have happened if he caught them? And so Rachel, she pours her heart out to her mom and tells her everything that happened the night before. And her mom is like, oh my God, I can't believe this happened. You have to tell the police because they haven't caught this guy. Like, you have a description of him. Like, go talk to the police. And so sure enough, Rachel, she gets in touch with Molly and, tells Molly what happened. And Molly's totally in hysterics. They can't believe what a close call this was. And they do go to the police. They tell them, to the best of their ability, what they remember about this guy, which unfortunately was not much. It was like he was average height, he looked to be maybe in his 40s. Like there wasn't much to their description. But fortunately, just 48 hours later, the police were able to catch this guy and he would make a full confession. Luckily, 2 days later, not really because of the girl's description at all, but just sort of by luck alone, the police happened to see the victim's car in town. Somebody was driving the victim's car around, and so they pulled this person over. It wound up being the killer who, after being arrested, did make a full confession. And so needless to say, Rachel and Molly, when they think about what happened that night in the cemetery, they feel very fortunate that Rachel sort of inadvertently made noise on their approach to go spy on the fire, which ultimately caused them both to sort of rethink their decisions and turn around and leave. It very likely saved their life. Because if that hadn't happened and they had gone over the hill and had been confronted by the killer, it's entirely possible that both those girls could have wound up in the bonfire as well. So before I became Mrballen and, told stories on the internet, strange, dark, and mysterious stories, I was in the military. I was a Navy SEAL for 7 years. And there was a time where I believed that was going to be my calling in life. But I ultimately got hurt, and honestly, it wasn't really a fit. So I wound up departing, and then obviously the rest is history. I became Mrballen. But, I have lots of stories about my time when I was in the military. I have lots of really funny stories about training and scary stories, about my actual service overseas. But one story that has always stood out to me was actually what it was like to deploy for the very first time to Afghanistan. And this is not really a war story. And that's why this story sort of stands out to me. So, I spend, years, literally almost 3 years training and becoming a Navy SEAL. And then it's like, okay, I get to my SEAL team on the East Coast in Virginia. And, so SEAL Team 2 is where I was. And we start training for our deployment. And we find out it's going to be to Afghanistan. And, this is back in 2013. And so, going to Afghanistan likely meant combat. In that time, there was still definitely active combat operations happening. And for Navy SEALs and for any direct combat unit, you do want to go to war, not because you are like a warmonger, but because that's what you train for. And so it's like, okay, like I'm getting ready for combat. And then the day comes, and the way you deploy this is not unique to Navy SEALs, but like they don't send you out to wherever you're going in one group because it's sort of risky. What if a plane crashes and your whole platoon gets wiped out, right? So you get sent out in like little batches, like sometimes on civilian flights. Like I flew first to South America with like a couple other SEALs. We're all dressed as civilians. And then we hitched a military transit flight actually into Afghanistan. But again, like my mentality as I'm getting ready for this deployment is like, okay, like this is the thing I've trained for. Like, here we go, like combat. And I remember I was on this military plane. This is the last leg actually getting into Afghanistan. And when we actually flew into Afghani airspace, which is an active war zone at the time, the pilots, the military pilots, they turned the lights inside of the aircraft from the white overhead, daytime lights to red. And then they told all of us to stay away from the windows. And the reason was we're now entering, the part of this trip where we're going to land. And in theory, the plane could get shot at. You don't want to get shot at through the window. And I mean, if you think about it, if you're getting blasted by like an RPG, it's not going to matter that like you're near a window or not. But it was sort of this stark reminder that it's like, okay, here we go. Like we're about to enter a war zone. And then the way these planes would land is they needed to basically cut down the amount of time they were within small arms range. So the lower you get, the more, sort of exposed the plane is. And so the way they'd land is they would take these really steep descents and basically like fly straight down and then land really abruptly. It was like sort of gnarly. And so we're coming in for this crazy landing. The red lights are on. Everyone's tucked away from the windows. And I'm like, okay, we're getting ready for Afghanistan. And we touch down. And it's a successful landing, and now we're in this like pretty well fortified base. Shank is what it was called. And I remember the back of the plane opened up after we sort of had stopped taxiing. We came to a stop, and the back of the plane opened up. And remember, my mentality is like, okay, we're going to war, right? And I grabbed my pack. The rest of my stuff had been packed on pallets and sent weeks prior. So all I have is a backpack. And me and a buddy of mine, another guy on my team, we walk out the runway, and we basically see Afghanistan really for the first time, because I really had the windows on the airplane, by the way, were like these little portholes. You really never got a good look, not to mention we had to avoid the windows. So this is like my first view of Afghanistan. And I remember just like looking around, and it was just unbelievably beautiful. Like Afghanistan is shockingly beautiful. It's in every direction, 360 degrees, these just enormous, like massive snow-covered mountains and just beautiful fields. It's like untouched land. And like we're in the middle of this like jagged scar across the earth, which is this like NATO base where war is sort of launched out of. But it's like you're looking around at just this unbelievably beautiful place. And it was like in such contrast to what I believed I was coming here for, or what I was there for, like to fight in a war. And it just like didn't compute. Like this is too beautiful a place to be having a war fought. But I mean, very quickly after sort of seeing this environment and being like, oh my gosh, we were quickly ushered over to this like holding area, and we had to grab our stuff. And then before long, we had jumped into these very up-armored military vehicles called RGs, which are like 50,000 ton anti-IED vehicles. Basically, if it detonates underneath you, in theory, you'll survive. And out we go, from the base we were on out to this like very forward operating base that was sort of out in the sticks. And it was like sort of a vulnerable spot. And it was where we were going to be operating from for the next 6 months. Our mission was pretty vulnerable. We were out sort of actually actively fighting the war. But that first night, we get to our actual base, this very stripped down, like very vulnerable spot out in the middle of nowhere. And when we got there, there were the previous team was still there. They were wrapping up their deployment, and there were interpreters who are a central part of the warfighting effort, you know, from our side. And a lot of these interpreters who are pretty young, like in their 20s, like they've been out there working with various units that have come through those bases for years. And because they're working with NATO, they don't have a place outside of the base. Like they're targeted by the Taliban and other sort of militant groups because, you know, they're working for NATO. They're traitors, you know? And so the great promise for these interpreters is that by working with NATO, eventually they'll be given the opportunity to leave Afghanistan and come to the United States. And for some people that's true, not true for everybody. But these interpreters are like hard as nails. They've been in so many gunfights. Like these people have seen some crazy stuff. And my role was to work with these interpreters. I was going to be someone that worked with our partner force. And so I get to this little outstation. It's late at night and it's sort of overwhelming, this whole thing. You know, the team that was already there, SEAL Team 8, they were like so like cowboy by this point. They'd been in combat now for the last 6 months. They're all just like jacked and huge beards. Like they could care less about anything. And I'm like super green. And I went and I met with one of our interpreters to like sort of give me a lay of the land of what to expect over the next couple of days. And so we talked about some operations we'd likely do and sort of, you know, got to know each other a little bit. But at some point, one of these interpreters, the guy I was talking to, who maybe was like 25, 26, and I was in my 20s too, he said to me, he goes, bro, and they all talk in like Western slang. Like their English is like rugged, like American military slang because they're around like 18-year-old Marines 24/7. He's like, bro, have you heard the story of what was in the cave in Kandahar? Now, we were in a different part of Afghanistan, but he was referencing Kandahar, Afghanistan. And what I would come to find out is there was this story about a giant, like a creature, some huge creature that lived in a cave out in the mountains of Kandahar. And like Afghanistan, again, is this huge, just like mountains everywhere. And there are all these cave systems up in these mountains, some of which are like untouched by humanity. And this Terp was like, bro, I'm telling you, it's real. Like there was a giant up in the caves in Kandahar. Like, have you heard about this? Like, I want to know more. The interpreter did. And so, you know, we didn't really talk much more than that, but it was planted in my mind that there was like this real belief by this interpreter that there was like some truth to this, what sounded like sort of a folklore, this crazy story about a giant in a cave. And so it stuck with me. You know, it stuck with me that I'd heard that story. Fast forward, you know, years later, I'm out of the military, and I've become Mrballen. You know, I've begun telling strange, dark, and mysterious stories on the internet. And I was thinking about what stories I wanted to tell. This was like in the very early days of having the channel. And I suddenly remembered like the Kandahar giant. And I was like, man, I want to look into that and see if there's any truth to what my interpreter was getting at. And sure enough, I found like this treasure trove of testimony from this special operations group, the Green Berets, that apparently did. Like this one particular group of Green Berets that apparently came in touch with something otherworldly up in the caves of Kandahar. And in particular, there was one soldier who just went by Mr. K because he was worried about his name getting out there, who gave just like shocking testimony about what they saw. And so I felt like I needed to do this story justice. I wanted to sort of compile the notes and put together a story that, you know, sort of picked up where my interpreter had began. And I told the story years and years ago. And tonight, I'm going to tell you that story again. So in 2002, there was this Army infantry unit that was out doing a patrol in the Kandahar mountain range. And again, you got to picture just massive snow-covered mountains. I mean, this is a huge area. And, you know, a lot of times in 2002, these patrols, you know, you'd be sort of looking potentially for cave systems where Taliban fighters would be camping out, or, you know, sometimes there'd be fighters that were down in the valleys below. But these patrols were fairly routine for NATO in 2002. And so this unit, they're out on patrol, and generally the way it works, really independent of what branch of the military you're in the US military, you know, when you're out on patrol, you basically update some level of higher command as you're doing the operation. And also, by the way, virtually no operations, no matter how routine or mundane, like no operations aren't planned out. Like everything is planned. Like what time you get there, how long you're going to be there, what you're trying to do, when you're going to leave, what platform you're going to use to leave. Like everything is really coordinated. And so this unit, they went out, for the, umpteenth time to do this patrol. And at some point in the middle of this patrol, the higher command lost contact with them. And the reason this immediately stood out as problematic is, it wasn't totally unusual for a group to lose comms. I mean, you're trying to communicate across huge mountain ranges, using, these radios that are really a lot of times not that great. And so losing comms is not that unusual. But generally speaking, like a lot of times if you lose comms, you get it back pretty quickly. And so there had been a pretty long period of time where no one could get in touch with this unit. And then on top of that, as higher command was beginning to figure out like what we should do here, should we send out a quick reaction force to go find them? Should we send air assets overhead to go try to look for them that way? As they're thinking about that, somebody realized that not only had they suddenly gone silent, this huge infantry unit, but also they had not called in a TIC before they went silent. So a TIC, or troops in contact, is the acronym for basically being in a gunfight. And the reason this is important is, when you're in a combat zone, your higher command doesn't automatically know if you're getting shot at or if you're in an active gunfight. You need to call it in. And the reason you call it in is because you may need huge help. You might want air assets to come in and save the day. You might need a medevac. You might need reinforcements. And so basically the instant you start getting shot at, commanders on the ground, or whoever's on the ground, could be someone super junior, they'll call into higher command and say, troops in contact, tick, 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 tick. And the reason they do that is basically to have help on standby. Now they're like, okay, we know something's going down, we're ready to support. And in fact, what we saw when we were in Afghanistan is, if anything, we were like too quick to call in a tick, because it's sort of like a cheat code, right? Like, oh, I think I heard gunfire way over there, call in a tick. And then immediately you got like warthogs overhead and crazy assets everywhere, like you're totally protected. Well, we sort of took advantage of it. And a lot of people did. Like, it's rare for the reverse to happen. Like, people are not conservative calling this in. And so for an entire unit to suddenly go like silent, having not called in a tick, it's either a huge like radio problem, but that usually gets resolved relatively quickly, or it's something else, something that is just harder to define because it just doesn't really happen very much. And so after a certain amount of time had passed, when still no one could get in touch with this unit, ultimately the Army decided this was, a big enough deal. There was enough people in that unit that were now unaccounted for, that they decided to send in an elite military unit to try to find them. And so they tapped this Green Beret unit. So the Army's top special forces team, the Green Berets, they grabbed a group of those guys and said, you go out into the mountains of Kandahar to their last known location and figure out what happened to them. And one of the people that was in this detachment of Green Berets was Mr. K, one of the people that gave pretty incredible testimony that I'm about to relay to you right now. So Mr. K and the rest of his small group of Green Berets, they hop on helicopters and they fly out to this section of Kandahar where, this infantry unit was last. And they touch down, and you got to understand that this is like rural as rural can be. There is, no people. Like, there's no cities, no nothing. There's like mud huts periodically, but it's just like mountains. You kind of feel like sometimes when you're in Afghanistan that you're like almost on a different planet. And so they touch down and they look around and they see nobody. Like there's no locals. There's certainly no, American military or NATO. It's just like a wasteland in all directions. And they know that the area they're searching is pretty sizable and it's very mountainous. So it's going to be like a very rough several days of basically hiking through the mountains trying to find any sign of this unit. And so they touch down and they all have like extremely heavy packs on. I mean, you got all your ammo, your equipment, like this is a rugged thing they're doing. And they start hiking through the mountains. Based on the brief that unit had given before they stepped out for this mission, they sort of had a rough idea, Mr. K and his unit, of the direction of travel. And so they're sort of following that direction. But as they're hiking through the mountains, I mean, the unit that Mr. K was a part of, they didn't find anybody. And for several days, I mean, they're out there in the mountains just hiking all day. You know, they came into contact a couple of times with the enemy, but there wasn't even any ticks or anything. It was just like at a distance, like, oh, there's some fighters over there. But they're on a mission to find these missing soldiers. So they're not trying to engage with anybody else. Like, they're just hiking and looking for any sign of this unit. But again, for a few days, they couldn't find anything. Finally, though, on the 4th day of this rescue mission, so during the daytime, Mr. K and his team, they're walking along the mountain range, and they decide to take this goat trail that they can see right ahead of them. It sort of goes up and over the top of this mountain. They decide, okay, we're just gonna take that goat trail and see what's on the other side. You know, there wasn't any clear agenda for why this goat trail was of interest, but they're like, oh, you know, everywhere else we're walking is just rugged and awful. At least this goat trail, a literal trail made by goats running along this area, is easier to walk on. So let's take that, we'll follow it to the other side, and we'll see what's up there. You know, and also we'll be up higher and we can maybe get a view down into the valley on the other side, and maybe we'll see something. And so Mr. K and the rest of the Green Berets begin making their way up this goat trail, which sort of, you know, meandered its way up and then eventually onto the other side. And as they're walking up, they start to notice these little bits of plastic and metal sort of strewn about on the trail. And at first, as they're walking, they don't actually know what they are. But as they keep moving, they start to realize that these are parts of military equipment. Like, these are parts of radios and other stuff that would definitely belong to, for example, an infantry unit. And so now, like, Mr. K and the others, they got their rifles sort of ready to go. They're walking up more apprehensively because they're thinking, like, this is obviously connected to what we're looking for. Like, who knows what we're gonna find once we cross the top of this mountain? Like, are we gonna find like a bloodbath? Are we gonna find the missing unit waiting for us? Like, they don't know. And so they continue walking up this trail, and as they get higher and higher, they find bigger and bigger pieces of military equipment on the ground, like whole military backpacks, like bigger chunks of radios. And then also they began finding bits of uniform, like military uniforms that even in some cases still had like name tags and patches on them. And they were able to see very clearly that those uniforms, at least, definitely belonged to the specific unit they were looking for. So they know, like, they've discovered their first real lead here, and it doesn't look good. And so up the goat trail they go, and they finally get to the very top. And I say this, you know, I'm trying not to be biased because obviously I was a Navy SEAL and I think very highly of US Special Operations and their training. But, you know, Green Berets and Navy SEALs, they're very different and definitely do different jobs. But in many ways they are peers, certainly in terms of like the rigor of training. And one of the things that is just absolutely true, and I've seen it in combat, is that when stuff gets wild, like in a combat scenario, in a dangerous scenario, these Green Berets would have absolutely fallen into their training like flawlessly. This would not have been, no matter how crazy or how insane whatever they saw on the other side of the mountain, whatever it was going to be, they were ready for it. And so they would have been like dialed in, making their way up the mountain, getting ready to handle whatever's up there. And so, you know, Mr. K and his team, they make their way to the very top of this goat trail. And when they crested the top, what they saw was like this plateau. So it wasn't like a peak, it was like this flat section of the mountain. And actually there was another section of the mountain that sort of went up beyond the plateau, and there were these huge like cave entrances that sort of basically fed out. These 3 cave entrances fed out onto this plateau, as if it was like the plateau was the front porch and the cave entrances are like the doors that lead into this upper section of the mountain. And on this plateau, scattered all over the place, is not just, you know, more pieces of military equipment, but also pretty obviously human bones, or what appeared to be human bones, like scattered about. And there was, you know, no living people up here. The missing unit was definitely not up here. But it looked like if they were up here, I mean, something horrible happened to them. And so once they reached the plateau, again, you got a picture like this elite military unit, they would have immediately taken up positions all around this plateau because they know these cave entrances have to be explored. You have to see who's inside of there. Like, is the missing unit in there? Are the remaining survivors taking shelter in there? Are there combatants in there? And so Mr. K and his unit, they sort of detailed taking up positions, getting ready to engage if they had to. And then once they were in position, Mr. K and the guy he was next to, his shooting buddy, if you will, were tapped to go up to the entrance of one of these caves and just look inside. And so silently they got up and they walked across this plateau while the rest of the team is sort of looking outward and also looking in. So there's 360-degree security. So Mr. K, he walks up along with his shooting buddy, and he said he looked into this entrance, this huge, massive entrance, like could easily just walk into this opening, but it's totally dark inside. And so he goes into the cave, and once he gets in there, like it's very dark, and he's sort of trying to look inside to see if he can see anything. And it does go back a little ways, but he barely takes a couple of steps into the cave when he realizes like there's like this sheer cliff within the cave. Like you basically walk in and then it shoots straight down. And Mr. K, he caught himself and he looked down to see if he could see what was down sort of in this pit within the cave, but it was just too dark, he couldn't see anything. And then, like as he's standing back up again, getting ready to sort of assess what he should do next, he sees like a flash of movement in the far backside of the cave, basically beyond this crevasse that he can't cross. And so Mr. K instinctively raises his gun like he's ready to engage whatever this is, but before he can, this enormous spear, like a massive javelin, comes soaring out of the cave and impales the shooting buddy. His name was Dan, the other Green Beret that was next to Mr. K, who went up to explore the cave. The spear impales him, sends him flying back, and this is in plain view of all the other Green Berets. They all see this happen, and then like in the space of a few seconds, this massive, just enormous human creature, this like 12-foot tall thing, comes bounding out of the cave, clears the crevasse, and charges out onto the plateau. And it sort of looked like a huge person, but again, it's like 12 feet tall. It's got 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot. It's wearing various animal skins, got this huge red hair, red beard, and it runs out to, presumably attack the Green Berets. But immediately they just start shooting it, and in like seconds, this massive creature falls to the ground, dead. And so at this point, like after the creature is down, I mean, nobody knows what to make of this, but again, it's like they fall back into their training. They immediately, once they know the threat is down and there's nobody else coming out of the cave, they run over to Dan to provide, life-saving care. But Dan's dead. I mean, he was killed by this javelin. And so now the team, they poked their head into the cave to make sure there wasn't anybody else, but as far as they knew, there wasn't. And for sure, this giant was dead. And so like they hadn't found the missing military unit, but now they have a casualty and like they have this horrible thing that's happened. And so one of the team leads for this Green Beret team, they end up calling higher command and they say, hey, you got to come get us. Like we can't even tell you what just happened, but we have a man down, killed in action, and we have this combatant, this creature, we don't even know what to call it, but you got to get out here and you got to take this thing too. We don't even know what it is. And so not long after, 2 helos showed up, and one of them was to transport the Green Berets and to transport Dan back to the base. And then the other helo had this huge net that they basically wrapped around this dead, huge giant, and they strapped it up to the underside of the helo, and then they flew off with this giant. And, Mr. K and his unit, they expected to be brought back to base and to basically debrief the mission, which, in layman's terms means you basically talk through what actually happened and you sort of put it down in your after action report, like what happened, what mistakes were made, what did we do, like you basically put it on the record, like what happened. And you do it typically like right afterwards. Even if you've had like a casualty, you immediately document what's happened. And so they go back to base expecting not only to tell their story about seeing this giant, if you will, but to maybe get some clarification about what the heck just happened. Like, they wanted some more information, but when they got back to base and they did their after action report, which they sort of did on their own, nobody came to talk to them. The unit was sort of pushed off to the side and told to just, write down what you saw and just leave it at that. After they wrote it all down and they included, the truth, everybody on the team saw what they saw, they were told by higher command that they actually could not publish those details in their after action report, and they had to change it. Like we can't say you fought a giant in a cave. We can't say that. Like there's no way that's true. You can't say it. And so Mr. K and his team, like despite knowing it wasn't true, they went and they changed the report. And they just said they came in contact with the enemy, and the enemy, through small arms fire, killed Dan. And then after they submitted this, erroneous report, they were then told to sign all these non-disclosure agreements to basically say they would not talk about what they actually saw in that cave. And after that, Dan and the rest of his unit, they were basically told, you can't talk about this. This is too sensitive. And they even went looking for more information about it. And they found that all of the reporting in Afghanistan around that time about that operation had been heavily redacted. Mr. K never even found out what happened to the missing unit that they had gone out looking for. Like, it was just this big mystery. But fast forward 14 years to 2016, and Mr. K just felt like he didn't want to keep this a secret anymore. And he spoke to some other members of his team that were there, and they too were just like really shaken up by what happened and just felt like it was wrong that nobody knew. And so that's what ultimately prompted Mr. K to go public with his story. And also when he went public, what he also discovered is that other people sort of in the military hierarchy also had some level of exposure to this giant. What Mr. K would discover is that after the giant had been hoisted in that net by that helo and flown off somewhere, apparently it had been brought to an airfield in Afghanistan, another NATO base, and pilots that were going to be transporting this to another base remember seeing this 12 to 15 foot tall giant looking person with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot in this net. They remember seeing it and actually describing it in their after action report. And they would say they were told not to include those details. And those details were redacted and made top secret. And so basically Mr. K, after coming forward, quickly learned through the grapevine that basically everybody affiliated with the giant was told not to talk about it. And the government basically shut it down, redacted it, and made it top secret. Now, I don't really know what to make of this story. There's a part of me that does want to believe that, the testimony of Mr. K is totally legitimate. But there's also a part of me that knows that, this could all just be made up. But a lot of people claim to have seen this thing. And I remember so distinctly, my own interpreter back in 2013 being so convinced that there was something in the caves in Kandahar, and he really wanted to know more about it. It's like, there's some level of truth to this. I was, in Afghanistan, and I was in the mountains of Afghanistan, not Kandahar. I was in Logar. But we used to walk by and look up and see these cave entrances, and I gotta tell you, it's unsettling. Who knows what's inside of those things? It doesn't seem entirely impossible that a giant could be in there, Like this is a landscape that's just, it's different. It's like a different planet out there. But, really what you're left with here is you have an entire infantry unit that's still unaccounted for, at least publicly, and you have an Army Green Beret in Dan who was killed in front of his team, and they want answers. And, it's like what you see is the government apparently went to great lengths to cover up what happened, or to at least disguise the truth. Whether or not they're covering something up remains to be seen, but I think there's more to this story that we simply don't know. But I'd love to hear what you think in the comments, so why don't you let me know in the comments and I'll get back to as many people as I can. Hey everyone, just a reminder, I'm going on tour this year, which means if you go, you can experience never before heard stories from me live and in person. We did this in 2024 and people loved it. So get your tickets today at tour.ballenstudios.com right now before they sell out. That's tour.ballenstudios.com. I can't wait to see you all at the shows. All right, thank you all so much for joining me tonight at the campfire. And if you enjoyed this, remember, we actually have a whole playlist of campfire episodes that are ready for you to binge right now. If you want to do that, go ahead and click right here and give them a watch. All right, until next time, see ya. All right, in 2010, there was this guy named Nate Smith, who was living in Oregon with his family. And unfortunately, in the fall of 2010, his father, the patriarch of the family, suddenly passed away. And it was sudden, and the family was one of those families. It was Nate, his mom, and I believe he had a sister. I know he had at least one other sibling. the four of them spent a lot of time together. That was sort of whenever they were not at work or school, this was a family that spent a lot of time together. And they especially spent a lot of time together outdoors. They were a very outdoorsy family. They liked to fish, they liked to hunt, go hiking. They lived out near Mount Bachelor in Oregon. Mount Bachelor is like this beautiful, I believe there's a ski resort there, but it's picture the huge mountains, snow, pine trees, it's beautiful. And so when this father passed, it sort of immediately created this new, very difficult dynamic. I mean, in addition to there being obviously grief associated and shock associated with his passing, there was also this sudden rupture in the way Nate and his mom and his other siblings sort of lived their day-to-day lives. Suddenly, everything that they did felt different because Dad's not around. And in particular, the family had a cabin out. It was near where they lived. They were sort of just outside of Mount Bachelor. They had a cabin that I believe the father actually built many years ago that was tucked away like up in the foothills of Mount Bachelor. And that small cabin, it was a 2-story cabin, little log cabin. That was a place that the family often went to on the weekend for various trips they would go on. But the dad, he really loved that cabin and he would go there all the time. It was sort of like, you would never be at the cabin unless Dad was there too. So that's like Dad's place. And so the dad passes away. And so you have this really difficult dynamic now, like their whole world has been turned upside down. And also the dad was the primary breadwinner for the family. And so now that he's gone, there wasn't a way to make ends meet for the family. I mean, he did leave behind some possessions that they'd be able to sell, but for the most part, it was suddenly financially really difficult for the family. And so given what I just described to you about the difficult dynamic, that sudden gap in their lives, the decision really by the mother in particular, there was a decision made pretty quickly to sell the cabin because it just felt like too difficult to imagine any of them going to the cabin and actually enjoying being there, given that Dad, is not there anymore. And so this decision is made. Mom's like, we got to sell the cabin. And Nate, the 17-year-old, his experience with his dad was, he went hunting and fishing with his dad all the time. His dad was like this pseudo survivalist type guy, and he would bring his son out there to that cabin pretty much more than anybody else. It was like the son and the dad went there especially a lot. And the son understood that it makes sense to sell the cabin. He didn't disagree with the decision. However, he just sort of felt like he needed to have closure with this cabin more than his mom or his other sibling. He felt like he needed to go there at least one more time, if nothing else, to just feel close to his dad one last time. And so he asked his mom if it would be okay if he went to the cabin by himself, just spent the weekend out there. He'd bring the family dog, whose name was Midnight. He'd go out there for a weekend, and it would just give him a chance to get that closure. And his mom said, it's a great idea. If that's what you want to do, we will wait to list the property. You can go out. It's yours until we say otherwise. Stay out there for as long as you need to. And then when you come back, we'll move forward with selling the property. So Nate, that weekend, this was sometime in, I believe it was December at this point, he loads up his dad's truck that his dad had willed to him. And he, brings Midnight the dog along, and Nate, he packed, drinks and snacks. He brought his PlayStation along and some DVDs. Remember when DVDs were a thing? A lot of DVDs. And he took off for the cabin up at Mount Bachelor. And to sort of give you some context of where the cabin was in relationship to civilization, it wasn't so much that this cabin was super isolated and really hard to get to. It wasn't. I mean, there was a main road, it wasn't lots of businesses and houses off of the main road, but there was a main road that led to where there was a side street you would take that would cut up through these tall pine trees. And, about a mile into the forest, you'd get to this property. So again, there's a major road that basically brings you there. However, these cabins that were built on Mount Bachelor were spaced really far apart.
So there were other cabins, but the closest one was about a mile away. So the neighbors exist, but they're not close enough to really feel like they're actually out there. So once you're at this cabin, it really felt like you were sort of isolated. You're tucked away amongst these huge pine trees, very dense, and there's no neighbors in sight. There's a huge mountain behind you. And so you can go to the main road, go into town, do what you got to do. But as soon as you're in that cabin, it really feels like you're sort of away from the world. And that was actually part of the allure of this cabin. It really felt sort of like peace, tranquil out there. And so Nate, he drives up to the cabin, he turns off the main road, and he makes his way to this cabin. And as he was making his approach along that last stretch before he actually saw his property, it had snowed, not a lot, but there was enough snow on the ground that he was looking out ahead at the road, and he was just gauging if there were other tire tracks on this road he was on. Because before he got to his house, or his cabin, I should say, the road forked in either direction, basically turning into driveways to the other two properties that, again, are a mile away, just about on either side. So this is a mile driveway. It's not really a driveway. These are additional roads. But he's looking to see if there are tracks that would give away whether or not the other neighbors were around. Because it's the winter, this is the time when folks would come out to their cabin and go snowboarding and skiing up on Mount Bachelor and just, be out here. But he didn't really talk to these people. So he's just looking at the road. And there's no sign that anybody has been out here. It's not a guarantee, but it looks like he's likely the only one out here, at least relative to his two closest neighbors, which again are miles away. For him, that was kind of great. He didn't expect to see his neighbors, but he figured the more isolation he could have, the easier it would be to sort of feel in touch with his dad. So he gets to the cabin along with his loyal dog, Midnight, and he parks the truck, he gets out. In front of this cabin, which is a 2-story cabin, there was a clearing basically to park your cars, like a little cul-de-sac in front. That's where they could park their cars. But beyond the front of the house where there was that clearing, and obviously beyond the road itself, basically every square inch was taken up with these huge pine trees, very dense forest. So he pulls into the cul-de-sac, he gets out, he takes all his stuff out of his truck, snacks, drinks, PlayStation, the DVDs, his bedding, whatever it is, and he goes inside the cabin. And the layout of the cabin is, it was pretty simple. You walked inside and there was a kitchen and there was a living room that were sort of connected to each other. There was no real wall between them. It was sort of an open floor plan. It's a pretty small cabin. So it's like one big room with windows that looked out onto that cul-de-sac from the kitchen. The kitchen was the most farthest forward room on the first floor. And then there was a second floor that you could access via a stairway in the back of the cabin from the living room that would go up to the second deck, which was a master bedroom. There was one other bedroom, a small bedroom, and the master bedroom sat sort of over the kitchen, so towards the front of the cabin. And from the master bedroom on the second floor, there was these sliding glass doors that looked out over, first of all, there was a balcony, a very small balcony just beyond those sliding glass doors. And then beyond that, you basically are looking out at the drive coming up to the property. You're looking out at that clearing, the cul-de-sac where the cars are, and then out to the forest beyond. So he goes in and gets set up, and he sets up his PlayStation in the living room. And over the next actually 48 hours, Nate had a great time. I mean, he actually expected when he got there to be sort of overcome with grief. He's in the place where everything around him reminds him of his now deceased father. But he found that it was actually really great. He did feel close to his dad. He did feel like this was a really good idea. And he also had the comfort of Midnight, his beautiful black lab. And so he has a really nice couple of days. It's snowing like crazy outside, but each of the days he was there, he was able to shovel out or basically put chains on his tires and get out to town. I'm not exactly sure how he did that, but he got out to town in the first couple of days, got food. He even went snowboarding one of the days. But for the most part, he was just hanging out at the cabin. And most of his time was spent down on the first floor in that living room near the TV. And then he would just obviously sleep upstairs in the master bedroom. But on day 3, he was supposed to be there for, I believe, 4 days, or at least 4 days. But on day 3, when he woke up on day 3, the trip started getting really weird. On day 3, he wakes up, and again, he's had 2 very nice days, and he walks into the kitchen and he looks out the window to the front of the property, to the cul-de-sac and beyond, and he sees that even though it's been snowing over the last few days, it has snowed a lot over the night. It snowed, feet of snow have come down. And, not alarming. This makes sense for this part of the world this time of the year. But Nate decided, you know what, I just don't have it in me to battle the weather, to battle the elements and try to go into town or try to go snowboarding. I'm just going to spend the whole day inside, hanging out, playing video games, chilling with my dog, just have a sort of lazy day at the cabin. And he wasn't upset about it. This seemed like a great thing. So he has this little morning routine, and at some point, Midnight, who, for the record, had been acting like a normal dog to this point in the entire trip. Also, for context, Midnight was a really well-trained dog. Just was an excellent, excellent dog. Was not erratic, was not crazy, did what it was told to do, very loyal. And at some point, on the morning of the 3rd day or mid-morning, Midnight began acting kind of funny, like Midnight needed to go outside. It seemed to Nate like Midnight needed to go outside to pee. And so he just got up out of his chair in the living room and, went outside with Midnight. Now, Midnight's on a leash. They go outside, it's still snowing, there's tons of snow. And Nate sort of expected that Midnight would not run off, because there's so much snow that she would likely just sort of do her business near the door and come back in. But instead, as soon as they stepped outside, Midnight didn't show any interest in wanting to go to the bathroom. Midnight instead was pulling Nate in the direction of basically towards the road that comes in, basically straight out in front of their cabin. It seemed like she was drawn in that direction. And, the snow is not like 6 feet high. It's, a couple feet of snow. He can walk through it and he's like, okay. And so he lets, Midnight pull him forward past the truck, and he's sort of walking out to where the road is that leads back out to the main road. And it's at that point that Midnight just stops, and she's looking down the road, just staring off into oblivion here. It's broad daylight at this point. And, Nate is like, what's gotten into my dog? There's clearly she's sensed something out here, but he doesn't see any animals out here. The dog has also not reacted like this at all over the past couple of days. And he's come out here many other times with Midnight. And this is just sort of unusual behavior by Midnight. But nonetheless, he's like, come on, just like do your business. Let's go, like, come on. And eventually Midnight would, sort of break her stare, and she would go to the bathroom. But as Nate is getting ready to pull Midnight back with him and bring her back into the cabin, he looks a little ways down the road, which he had been looking at to this point, but not critically or closely. And he sees what looks like footprints in the snow. And remember, it's been snowing quite a bit. And so if there are footprints, it needs to be relatively recent. Otherwise, they'll be covered up by the snowfall. And, right away, Nate's thinking how weird that is. There is the possibility that if there were footprints up here, one, it could totally be an animal, which would not be strange. There could be deer or moose or whatever else is in Oregon. But it also could be one of his neighbors. There were times in the past where some of these people that lived far away would just go for a walk and sometimes cut through the property line of Nate and the others. That wasn't totally unusual. But just sort of given the fact that he had come in a few days earlier and not seen any sign of anybody being at those other houses, the other cabins, and he had spent the whole day at the cabin, never heard or saw anybody, it just seemed weird that there'd be footprints out here. And so with Midnight, he sort of walks a little bit closer, just farther down towards this road to get a better look. And sure enough, there are footprints. And Midnight, as soon as they start walking in that direction, she began pulling him to go closer and closer. It seemed pretty clear that she was engaging before and now with, these footprints and whatever's out here, whatever's made them. And he gets close enough to where he can, again, clearly see there are footprints. And he sees the stride of these footprints is long enough that it could be a person. It could also be an animal. He doesn't really know. It's too deep to see the actual imprint, to see if it's, a boot or a paw print or a hoof or something. But he's just taking it all in, and he's looking at the footprints, and they sort of come out of the tree line. They haven't come up the road. They come out of the tree line and sort of pace around a little bit, sort of on the road that leads in, and then they turn and they appear to go back into the tree line. Not totally unusual, but it registers for Nate that this is a little bit odd. If that's a person, what are they doing out here? And I didn't see him, and I've been up and moving around the kitchen quite a bit, and based on the snowfall out here, there's a pretty good chance that these prints were made in the last 30 minutes, the last hour. These are recent, and I didn't see anybody. That's just weird. But Nate kind of does what I think most of us would do, which is like, there's probably some reasonable explanation for this. I'm not gonna worry about it. So he takes Midnight, who by this point really wants to go investigate these footprints and whatever's made them, but he drags Midnight back. He brings her back in the house, in the cabin. He goes inside, and now at this point, he can't help but feel a little on edge, a little bit like, my privacy's been invaded by someone or something. And so he actually draws the blinds, locks the windows, locks the doors, and he's like, I'm just gonna sort of cave it up for the rest of the day. I'm not gonna think about what's out there. It's probably just animals or whatever. It's no big deal. So he's back in his cabin, and over the course of the afternoon, again, the windows are all drawn, and he's just sort of enjoying video games. He's sort of forgotten about the footprints. Midnight continued to act really strange. Not all day, not the entire afternoon, but periodically it was like something kept spooking her. And she kept running to the various exits of the cabin, whether it was a door or a window, and she would whimper like she really wanted to look or go outside. And Nate, a couple times he let her out to go to the bathroom, and it seemed like each time she'd be drawn to those footprints, but he wouldn't walk over there. He kind of kept her close to the cabin. But it was like all day, Midnight just could not let go of there's something out there. There's something going on that's piquing her interest. And for Nate, who admits that he considered himself a pretty tough guy, who was used to being out in the wild by himself. I mean, his mom didn't care at all. This 17-year-old kid is just, go out into the wilderness in Oregon, be out there as long as you want by yourself. It says something about his competency, at least his perceived competency. But he was pretty spooked. He was starting to feel spooked. He just felt like something weird's going on. But, he began to he continued to tell himself that it's no big deal. So that night, they're back in the cabin. Nate makes sure everything is locked, everything is shut, all the blinds are drawn, and he goes upstairs to the bedroom where he sleeps, the master bedroom that has the sliding glass doors that look out to the short balcony that looks out over the courtyard and down to the road below. And he gets in bed, and Midnight pops up on the bed with him, and they lay down, and they are about to go to sleep when Midnight really gets spooked. Like something's going on for Midnight, like more than the whole day. Something really got her attention. And she bolts downstairs to the first floor. And Nate, it's pitch black in their cabin, or close to it. They're in the middle of the woods in Oregon, very isolated. And he can hear his dog just pacing back and forth and whimpering near the door and pawing at the door. She really wants to go outside. And Nate, at this point, he is admittedly scared, and he doesn't want to go outside. He doesn't want to bring her out to pee. He doesn't want to do anything outside. He wants to stay in the house, right? But he still feels like maybe she does need to pee. And so eventually he gets up and he goes downstairs, and sure enough, Midnight is just so stressed. She wants to go outside. He puts her on a leash. He grabs, his cigarettes and his flashlight. He's like, I'm going to just be tough about this. I'm going to go out there, let her pee, come back in. He goes outside, and it's all dark, snow's falling. He's got his flashlight, he's looking around. He doesn't see anything out there, just snow everywhere, trees, snow's falling. And at midnight, doesn't want to pee. She wants to run off into the forest, and he's like holding her back. And finally, he gave up on having her pee because he just felt like she's not out here to do that. She's out here for whatever thing she's sensed out here. And so Nate's like, enough. Comes in the house, and he's like, you know what? If she needs to pee, she can pee in the house. Like, I'm not doing this. I feel unsafe being out there. I'm not doing it. Back in the house, back in the cabin, they lock the doors, they go back to the bed. And so Nate now, he can't sleep. He's just laying in bed. Midnight is like on all fours on the bed, unable to settle down. And as he's laying there trying to convince himself that, everything's okay, he hears something. And it's coming from the roof. He would describe it as what sounded like hooves walking on his roof. And there is no attic in this cabin. The roof is basically right above him. And he hears these 6 distinct steps across the roof, like someone's pacing or something, some animal, something is pacing across the roof of this cabin. And Midnight instantly is like looking up and growling. Midnight bolts off the bed. She runs over to the sliding doors that lead out to the balcony. She's trying to go out on the balcony. And Nate, like, he's thinking, how could anything get up there? There isn't a way to get onto the roof. There is no way. There's unless you had a ladder. And he certainly didn't have a ladder out there that led up onto the roof. This makes no sense to him. And he's also thinking, if somehow there was a tree tall enough, let's just say, that overlooked the roof, that maybe an animal leapt out of onto the roof, wouldn't I have heard the impact of it striking the roof? Similarly, if somebody was climbing up a ladder, I would hear the ladder. There's no noise machine going off. There's no fan going off in his room. It's silent. But all he heard were the 6 steps. And then the steps stopped. There was no other sounds. And so at this point, Midnight is over at the sliding doors that lead out to the balcony. And, she's desperate to go out there. And Nate is sort of having this crisis. It's not that late. He has the whole night ahead of him. He feels very on edge, but he sort of feels like, I can't just pretend this is not happening. Like, I'm gonna be up all night regardless, but I need to face whatever this is. It's probably just an animal. And maybe it's an animal that's stuck on the roof and it needs help getting down or something, whatever. But he sort of works himself up that he's like, I need to go out there. I need to go see what's going on. And so he gets up, he puts on his jacket. He has heard no more steps at this point. Midnight's still over at the door. The room is dark. He walks over and he slides open the curtains. And he's looking out, and there's no light out there. There's a small light downstairs that kicks on with motion, but it's not on right now. It's just darkness. He can kind of make out with some moonlight some of the snow coming down, but he knows he's looking out to the front of the property, but it's dark. And then he grabs his flashlight. He's got it in hand, and he's like, all right. He opens up the sliding glass door, and he steps out onto the balcony. And the first thing he does, as soon as he's out there, is he whips around and looks up at the roof behind him, because it's basically right in front of him from the balcony, and he shines his light, and he's looking at the roof, and there's nothing up there. There's no animal, there's no person, there's nothing. And in fact, he can't even see any footprints, which to him was incredibly relieving. He's thinking, I'm scared, I'm making things up. There was never anything. But Midnight, meanwhile, who's right next to him on the balcony, she's now growling. And she's looking out. He can kind of tell she's looking out into the darkness in front of the house. And so Nate takes his flashlight and he goes from looking up on the roof and he begins to wheel the flashlight around. And he begins to scan the tree line, which from his perspective out on this balcony, that the nearest tree line is, 30 or 40 feet away, that tree line. And he's scanning the tree line, and Midnight's looking basically straight out. And so he's making his way until he's going to see whatever she's growling at. And he eventually reaches there's this one big tree that sort of sits almost right in front of the cabin. And it's got this long branch that they call it the sitting tree, because it almost looks like there's a seat on this huge branch that's like 20 feet off the ground. And his flashlight reaches the sitting tree, and he stops, because illuminated by his flashlight is this man who's crouched, almost perched on this branch. And he's got these long arms, and he's gripping a branch above him. He looks like he's not wearing any clothes. He's barefoot, and his mouth is wide open, and he's staring directly at Nate. And Nate, for a second, can't even process what he's seeing, but then he's suddenly so scared, his instinct is to grab Midnight, jump back inside of his house, shut the sliding doors, shut the curtains. And so he's just locked himself inside of his cabin. But as soon as he did that, he's like, oh my God, there's someone out there. I need to know what they're doing. Are they going to come try to attack me or something? And so it's only been a couple of seconds now. And from now, inside the cabin, the glass doors are shut. He opens up the blinds, does not open the door. He opens the blinds. Now he's got glass windows and he's looking out, and he raises his flashlight and he presses it to the glass and he shines it on the sitting tree, and there's nobody there now. And he looks all around and there's no one. It's just darkness. It's a dark forest. No one's out there. And so now Nate does not know what to make of this, because he's heard footsteps on the roof. Impossible footsteps. He saw the footsteps yesterday that didn't really make any sense. His dog's been acting funny. This guy, whatever this is, he described it as being so tall, long, skinny, tall, gray-looking figure, clearly is out here, or I'm losing my mind. And so his decision was, I'm just gonna stay awake all night, be vigilant and wait this thing out. And tomorrow morning, as soon as the sun comes up, I'm out of here. And so he did a pass all through his house to ensure all the doors are locked, all the windows are locked, drew all the curtains, and then he and Midnight hopped on the bed in the master bedroom and just prepared to wait, because at this point, he doesn't feel like it's safe to go to sleep. And so he's sitting in bed. Midnight is totally on edge, but she's gone from being angry, like wanting to attack, to now being a little bit scared herself. And she's tucking up against Nate on the bed. And after about 30 minutes, something downstairs gets Midnight's attention. Midnight leaps off the bed, but instead of running down the stairs, she runs to the top of the stairs. And now she's basically looking down to the first floor. Nate's on the bed. He's looking over at Midnight. And then Nate hears a tapping sound on his front door downstairs, almost like someone's tapping the door with their finger over and over again. And then it stops. And then Midnight sprints downstairs. And for a minute, Nate's like, what do I do? I mean, is that guy down there now? I have no idea what to do in this situation, so he just waits. And Midnight, she's pacing around, and eventually she calms down, and she comes back upstairs. There's no more tapping. And so Nate, his heart's racing. He's thinking, like, is this the same guy? What is this thing? Who is this thing? Who is this? A minute later, he hears more tapping, but now it's not coming from the first floor front door. It's coming from the side. He had a bathroom just off the master bedroom, and there's a little sliver of glass that looks into the bathroom. And he can distinctly hear, even though he didn't hear any sounds of someone climbing the exterior of their cabin, which would be required to get to this, something is tapping on the small pane of glass, looking into the window right behind him. Nate's horrified. The tapping goes on for a bit. Midnight at this point is spooked. She's tucked up against him. She's just looking into the bathroom. The tapping stops. Then there's more tapping on the other side of the cabin. And for about an hour or so, this is how it went all around the house. Just periodic tapping, all the different windows, the doors, the walls. There was no sound leading up to the tapping. It would just start somewhere around the cabin. It was absolutely terrifying. And then at a certain point, somewhere around 2, 3 in the morning, he heard the sound of footsteps out on the balcony. And then the tapping began on the glass of the sliding glass doors, 6, 10 feet away from him and Midnight. And all night, for the rest of the night, just sporadic tapping on that door, until finally the sun came up and the tapping stopped. And at that point, Nate is desperate to get out of here. He's so scared. But the sun is up now, the blinds are all drawn. He hasn't heard tapping in some time. And he goes over and he opens up the blinds and he looks out onto the balcony. And there's all these hoof prints all over the front balcony. And he steps out onto the balcony and he looks down, and it's an unbelievable sea of hoof prints all around the house. There's a racetrack around the house. He turns, looks onto his roof. There's all sorts of hoof prints on his roof. They are everywhere. And so Nate grabs his dog, grabs his stuff, jumps in his car, speeds home, and could not have been happier that they sold that place within the next month or so, because he was never going to go back. And he has no idea what it was. So that's the story. I think it's called Who Was Knocking? So there you go. What do you think? What do you think of that? That was a pretty good rendition. All righty. Well, unfortunately, the chat is sort of delayed, so I can't really get your live reactions. Let's see. It was Santa and his reindeer. Yeah, probably. Probably. I don't know what to make of stories like that, because I think that in a situation where you're out in the woods by yourself, even if you're like a survivalist or something, I think it'd be easy to work yourself up and get scared. However, how do you make sense of all the hoof prints around the house? I don't know. Pretty good. So on that note, remember we have a cool thing coming out here. Stick around for the big announcement, okay? But I think now's a good time to reference that this graphic novel, while it does not necessarily include that particular story, It does have 9 stories in it. It's an anthology of stories that are sort of along the same lines, beautifully brought to life with illustrations by Andrea Muti, okay? And I want to tell you that actually right now, why don't we do this right now? Throw the graphic up for, you can still get yourself a signed copy of Where Nightmares Live. If you go to book.ballenstudios.com, you're going to land on this page here at Premier Collectibles and Books A Million. You can get yourself a signed bookplate copy by yours truly. Pretty cool, okay? And actually, if you go to the next graphic here on that same website, book.ballenstudios.com, if you scroll down, those are the other places you can purchase said book, Where Nightmares Live. Those are not of the signed variety. So if you want to do that, you should. It's pretty good. If you like that story, we got 9 more in the same vein. And while we're on the topic of selling things, get yourself a seasonal official Mrballen flannel. There it is. If you go to shopmrballen.com, thanks for putting the sign out there so I remember the URL. Shopmrballen.com, get yourself one of these sweet flannels, 20% off. What a deal. Shopmrballen.com, get yourself a flannel. So, what we're going to do is we have a little bit of time. Don't worry if you're sticking around for the big announcement, it's coming. But first, we're going to do a little Q&A. So why don't you all fire off your questions in the chat? I'll do my best to read them. It kind of flies through. But while you all populate some questions in the chat, I'm going to take a few questions from our Discord server. Shout out to all the members of our Discord server. If you don't know what that is, well, it's pretty cool. We have this server with like over 100,000 people in it. It's free to join. It's like a big internet hangout spot. It's like the town square for the strange, dark, and mysterious. I'm pretty sure there are links in my bio. It's free to join. I think you can probably just Google like Discord Mrballen. It'll bring you to it. But anyways, these are some questions from Discord, and then I'm going to grab some from here as well. First question. If your life was ever turned into a movie, who would you want to play you? You know what's funny? I don't even know why I just thought of this. I haven't read these questions yet. This is off the cuff, so this is not a staged answer. I don't know if you guys are big fans of Daniel Tosh, the comedian, or not. He shares no likeness with me. We are in no way similar. But I think he's hilarious, and he would not, I don't think he'd do a good job representing me, but he'd be really funny. He's like my favorite celebrity. He also notoriously doesn't do like any public appearances. He doesn't interact with anybody. He's like really private. And I think it'd be cool to have Daniel Tosh play me. Are you coming to the UK? From Trill1701. I think eventually, yeah. So this year, unfortunately, we could not swing a live tour, which frankly was crushing. But we will definitely do more live events, not just live streams, but live in-person events. It was really, really cool doing that last year. We went on, actually, real quick, who went to one of the 15 live shows in 2024? That was a good time. Let us know in the chat. Or the one in 2023 in Austin. There was another one we did. But I think that eventually we could go to the UK for sure. Do some storytelling. I love doing the live stuff. Here's a question. Do you sleepwalk every night? Not every night, but pretty close. There's I believe I have a combination of nightmare syndrome that I've had since before the military. So it's not like I did Town Hall in New York City. Nice. Some folks were at, you were at the one in Charlotte. Very nice. Crystal Capone 2243. Nightmare syndrome is exactly what it sounds like. You literally just have these visceral, awful nightmares. I started having like sleepwalking episodes when I was 18 in college. My first one, I guess now I think the statute of limitations has passed, so I won't get in trouble. But when I was in college, my first semester in college, I think it was that while it was, I think it was my first semester in college. I was at UMass Amherst. Anybody attend the University of Massachusetts in beautiful Amherst, Mass, UMass Amherst. I was asleep in my dorm in the John Quincy Adams dorm. It's like this huge high-rise dorm. It's like 24 stories. I went to bed and I suddenly woke up, and I have this weird. If you've not sleepwalked, it's hard to put this in perspective. But basically, when you're sleepwalking, you're sort of aware that something's not quite right. Like, you're not quite normal, but you can't help but feel all the fear or anxiety that's associated with whatever dream or experience you're having in your sort of dreaming state. You're sort of really caught between reality and dreams. And so I have this moment where I'm sort of vaguely aware that I'm standing in the hallway of my dorm on the 20th or 19th floor or something. And I also look down at my hand, and I notice that it's sort of bloodied, like I punched something. At least that's what it looks like. And I also glance up and I notice that there's a fire alarm that's right in front of me on the wall. And there's there's a plastic cover, that's designed to sort of be there so you don't accidentally pull it. You lift it up and pull the fire alarm, and it's been broken. It looks like it's been impacted by something. And I'm sort of putting together that this doesn't feel right. Like maybe I did this. And then I sort of take stock of the fact that the alarm's going off in the dorm. And so I run to the stairwell, and there's all these people evacuating. No one's panicked. It's college kids. And we walk down like 19 floors of stairs, and then I go outside, and it's raining, and everybody basically congregated in right outside the front doors because it was raining. But I like walked outside, and I don't even know. I don't know. I must have been sleepwalking. And I like wandered away from the group and slowly came to realize I was only wearing shorts, and it's like cold, it's raining, I'm just wearing shorts. And I walked to this puddle, and I'm like looking at my hand, and I'm standing in this puddle. It's like ankle deep, and I'm like dipping my knuckle in the water for a while until it sort of like dawned on me that I was sort of sleepwalking. And then I ran back to the group and pretended I was acting normally. But I don't have proof of this, but I'm reasonably certain I pulled that fire alarm in my sleepwalking state. But that was in 2018. That was not 2018. Oh my God, that was in 2006. So, but anyhow, do I sleepwalk every night? No, but nightmare syndrome is a thing. You basically have nightmares. And then I have this thing that I believe I have. I've done sleep studies. No one can quite pin it down. It's called non-REM. Oh, what the heck is it called? Disturbance something or other. Basically, when I'm not in REM, I basically stay in deep sleep so long, and then I like have a hard time coming out of it. Anyways, I'm just a mess. So a lot of times I sleepwalk. A lot of times. I slept walk once. It's unreal. From Nixon 7310. It's weird. A lot of my sleepwalking is me leaping out of my bed and running as fast. I sleep alone because of this, because I'm a horrible sleep partner. Shout out to my wife, Amanda, who puts up with it, or she did for the first decade of our marriage. Now I sleep alone. I run out of the room screaming profanities, usually at the absolute top of my lungs, because I believe someone's going to kill me. And then I sort of like come to, my wife's like, go to bed. Lovingly, she says that. So yeah. All right, I told you guys to put questions in here, and I've done a horror. What happened to your neck? From Chickswin. Chicks, WNN. What happened to your neck? Here, let's do this. And I'm not insulting you, Chickswin, but I've tried so hard to cover this. Would someone, or would you all like to put in the comments what's wrong with my neck? Let's see how many people have taken the many times I've tried to address it. Basically, I do an exercise in the gym that cuts it, and I keep doing the exercise because you got to keep going. You got to stay disciplined. And I cut my collarbone every single time. Kiara, Keara, K.E.A.R.A. What's my go-to coffee order? Honestly, I just do black, venti, no ice, but iced coffee from Starbucks. So iced, black, no ice from Starbucks. And you know what I actually do? I buy them sort of in bulk. I get 6 coffees like that, and I put them in my fridge. And then every day, I got a nice, fresh, iced black coffee. All right, let's see. A couple more questions. We got plenty of time. Kathleen Niece, 1217. What's your favorite horror movie? So me and my children, I don't know if this is age appropriate or not for my kids, but we watched Signs recently by Mel Gibson. That scared the heck out of me when I was a kid. Honestly, it was just that scene with the alien walking past the alleyway at the kid's birthday party. Horrifying. And also Joaquin Phoenix is such a good actor. It's just, I'll watch him in anything. So we watched that. That's one of my favorites. And we watched Paranormal Activity 1 and Paranormal Activity 2. Those are great films too. I think the first one was better though, because it sort of set the genre in motion, sort of. Although that really set the genre. I think Blair Witch Project did the found footage thing first. But I'd say Signs. I don't know if it counts as horror, but I'd say Signs. That's probably it. Navy Aviator just said, I'd be willing to argue that by the 6th cup of coffee I've put in the fridge that it's no longer fresh. I disagree because I drink too much coffee and I fly through them. So it's like within a couple of days, I'm hitting number 6. Grant Kelly, 7490. Are you sober? I am. I am sober as of May 5th, 2024. I've always struggled with substance abuse, namely alcohol. But the way I would struggle with it is I would convince myself I had no issues with it and have periods of my life where I would ruthlessly binge drink by myself, often at night. I would like hide. My go-to actually became, well, I'm not advocating for this in the least, but it was like those seltzers, those hard seltzers, because they didn't give me a hangover and I could drink them really fast. And I would like sneak into my garage at night and like drink 6 or 8 or 10 as fast as I could and then like go to bed. I don't even know why I did that, but it became like I had to do it. And then my wife would catch me and then I would tell her, oh my God, I'll never do it again. And I would do it again. And I genuinely, it wasn't like I'm a bad person. I just couldn't not do it. I would go through months. At one point I did a whole year where I didn't touch anything, but I would always just fall back into it because I'd have like a good run in my life. I'd be like hitting all my responsibilities and like just being like good in every way that I deemed good. And I'm gonna reward myself. I'm gonna get drunk by myself in my garage with when all the kids and my wife is asleep. It's a bad setup. Doesn't really. Oh man, it was awful. It got so bad that in May of 2024, I did sort of feel like if I didn't clean up my act, one, the health issues for me would be pretty real. Also, trivia: if you look at some of the older videos of mine on YouTube, I gotta say I'm hungover in a lot of those videos. So it was just taking over my life. But I felt like it was gonna ruin my marriage to Amanda. You know, we got married in 2011. We got 3 kids together, but you know, it was like 6 times or something that I got so bad, and then she caught me after I promised I wouldn't do it again. It's that cycle of lying. Even though my intentions were good, the lying is just, it's tough on a marriage when it feels like you don't have trust. Even though I really believe that addiction is like a disease, and at a certain point, I wasn't choosing to harm my wife. I was just doing the thing I was addicted to, which was like binge drinking alcohol more than anything else. So I have stopped. I got to be honest. I did do AA for a time. I did it in Texas for a little while. I did it in Jersey as well. And then I did it. And so I'm laughing because I probably should have kept it up, but I ended up not doing it anymore. I don't know. It didn't really work great for me. I felt like I just felt ready to stop, I suppose. And also, it was just eating up a lot of my time to go to the meetings. I know that sounds horrible, but in the spirit of transparency, that's sort of the reality. But now, like, I look at this platform I have as like a place where I'm being held accountable every day, because I made it a thing that I'm sober. And I don't judge in the least anybody who's not sober. But I'll tell you, if you have an issue, and you probably know you do, sobriety, it sucks at first, but you quickly realize that the things that you would, when you're in the middle of abusing substances, you view things like sitting on the couch and watching a show like with your kids it would be kind of boring. I hate to say that, but it's true. But when you remove the substances and it's out of your system, the way you react to things totally changes. You start getting like dopamine rushes from things that are ordinary and like good. Like hanging with your kids suddenly is honest to God enjoyable, and like you want to do it, you want to be there, you want to be present. It applies to everything. Like it reshuffles the way you are made happy. And then once you're there, it's easy to maintain it. It's just hard to get there, of course. So shout out to those struggling with that. I know it's hard. It took me years and years and years. I think this is the final time. I believe it is. So, all right. Let's see. We have a few minutes left. I'll do one more question. I'll take one from Discord, so you can stop pummeling the chat with questions. Number 14 was, it's after all the stories you've researched over the years, have they had any effect on your beliefs? I wish I knew who asked that question. So if you asked that question, it's a great question. The truth is, I've always been really open and interested in the strange, dark, and mysterious. This channel certainly did not come to be because I was like, I'm going to make a YouTube channel. It was a byproduct of already being really genuinely interested in this genre. I find the world's mysteries to be fascinating, like especially like kind of scary stuff. But so the reason I say that is I think I was more tempted to believe things at the beginning of doing Mrballen. Like this started really in earnest in 2020. Now, as a result of having researched and read through and just read so much and researched so much, you realize that there really aren't a huge number of like highly credible, not paranormal, but like weird happenings. There definitely are those that have happened. We tell as many as we can on the channel and on the podcast, but there's so many stories that are fabricated online, maybe with good intentions, maybe with not. And I think that having a keen eye for not wanting to believe. Now, with that said, there's like a gray area, and we'll often sort of live in this gray area, which is you get somebody's point of view. Like you speak to somebody like Nate, that's not really his name, but when I spoke to him, like that was his perspective. That's what he saw. That's what he experienced. Whether or not it happened exactly the way he recalls, or whether or not my rendition holds up to what he actually saw, is secondary to the fact that in his life, he had an experience that was like that. That's what it was. It could have been something that was totally benign, but we don't have that information. All we have is his testimony. And so if you take it as a story and you take it as that's what he thinks he saw and felt and witnessed, then that's what it is, and it's great. But if you start getting into like, what do I believe in, like in terms of paranormal or in terms of this, I think I'm much more skeptical as a result of all the research, but still very open-minded. There was a channel that I used to love that's called, and they actually might still be around. I think they changed a lot, but it's called Dark 5, the number 5. There's no audio. It's just this creator would find the craziest like world mysteries. You should still check them out. I hope they're still on there. And they just would have a couple of sentences they would put on the screen. They'd like play the video. The video is like 3 minutes long. And it would be like a slideshow of these fascinating images, these horrifying images with like little bullets that sort of gave context to the pictures. And I would go down these crazy rabbit holes, and I thought they were so cool. I'll say Dark 5, I'm just promoting them because I think they're great. They will talk about stuff that is, in my mind, a lot of it's pretty credible. So if there was a place that you wanted to go and I'm not giving an endorsement to all their content, but a lot of the stuff they cover on Dark 5, it's like, look into it yourself. There's some validity to it. Rob Gavigan, yeah, I love that guy. He was one of my favorite channels. Mr. Nightmare, love Mr. Nightmare. Anyhow, okay, so here we go. We're gonna go to the big announcement that you've all patiently waited for. So, again, this is shout out to Antonio, who came up with this brilliant plan here. So what we're gonna do is over the next 2 weeks, this is gonna be starting tomorrow. And for those that don't know, if you just joined late, I said there was gonna be a game that we're gonna announce here that's gonna play out over the next 2 weeks. Here's the game. We are going to be hiding copies of the new graphic novel, Where Nightmares Live, that will have a special customized inscription and signature from me on the book. You'll definitely know if you found one of the hidden books. We're going to hide them all over the country. We're going to hide one a day starting tomorrow. So on Halloween, that's the first book that's going to get hidden. And the way it's going to go is over the next 2 weeks, every day at 2 p.m. Eastern, give or take, we're going to drop a clue as to where that day's book has been hidden. They are not all going to be hid in bookstores. Some will, but some will be hid in, appropriate spooky places. Nothing that's unsafe. Don't worry, kids. I think it's safe to say kids can take part in this. This will not be dangerous, other than maybe you need to go into some spooky graveyard or something. But each day, keep in mind, we only will know if you found it if you document it. So we're basically hoping that with each person who finds a book, we did this the last couple of days we were doing this, and people did respond this way. Take a picture of the inscription, because it's a unique inscription inside the book. Also, the book is yours to take, of course. You don't have to do anything. It's yours to take. Take a picture. You don't got to be in the picture. If you want to take a video, if you want to be in, great. Send it to me or tag me, but in some way, get it to the Mrballen Instagram account. We are on the lookout for these videos and pictures, and then I will interact with you, congratulate you, and make you feel great about your big find, talk to you a little bit, and we'll put you on social media. So it's going to be a scavenger hunt every day for the next 2 weeks, starting tomorrow. Is a clue coming out today, though?
No, announcing it today. Clue tomorrow.
The first clue is tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern, and then every subsequent day, 2 p.m. Eastern, about that day's hidden book. When the clue goes out at 2, the book will already be in place. So you just sit there, and if you're lucky enough that the clue tells you that something's near you, go out and get it. It's going to be worth it. I wish you happy hunting. Again, before we close this thing down, Where Nightmares Live, there are still signed copies. I'm going to throw that graphic back up on the screen here. At Premier Collectibles and Books A Million, you can go to book.ballenstudios.com. It'll bring you there. There's the other places you can get the book. Those are not signed copies, though. We also have this nifty flannel. If you want to go back to me here, the yellow Mrballen flannel. There you go. Boom, 20% off. Go to shopmrballen.com. This thing's sweet. 20% off. Miss anything? I think that's it. You guys are awesome. I really appreciate you guys sticking around. That's going to do it. Happy Balloween. Happy Halloween. Again, clues, 2 p.m. Eastern on my social media, Instagram. Tomorrow is the first clue at 2. Tomorrow is the first hidden book. That's going to do it. Thank you all so much. Happy Halloween.